Okay, I'm going to start because this is part of the talk. What we're doing right now is actually a good illustration of what we need to know in the future, in the present and the future. So I'm going to, you guys just keep going. See if you can get, wait, you had a presenter view just a minute ago. Okay, so one of the conclusions that I'm going to come to is that computer literacy is different now than it was in the 70s. Now it's all about apps. This is an app we're using here. And the first thing to know is what app you want to use. Is it supposed to do what it is you want to do? So you have to know what you want to do. You have to know what tool is supposed to do that. Then you have to know how to operate the tool. People usually stop there. But the next thing you have to know is what to do when it doesn't work the way you expected it to do. So this is a perfect example. And the other example I have in the last couple of days is I flew in from California. And when I got to the airport in San Francisco, it's an hour and a half to get from my house to the airport in San Francisco, and then I had 2 hours to sit around. I get in, I try and check into on the kiosk, and the kiosk says, "Tough luck, buddy. Your flight's been delayed. You're going to miss your connection in Atlanta, and there's no flight that gets in before 5 a.m. into Philadelphia." Hey. Okay, so to be computer literate, you have to be ready to deal with when the machine messes up. Thank you, guys. You have to know how to experiment and try things. You have to know when to try things and when to give up. Okay, so they did it. I couldn't have done it. I would have just said, forget it. We can get the slides up there. I'll do it without my notes. This has my notes, but I'm not going to use my notes anyway, probably. Since this is self-introduction, I'm Liza Loop. I've probably taught 1,000 people to use their first computer since 1972 when I started this. And I'm still a beginner. And I stay a beginner because I'm interested, I'm not a computer hobbyist. I'm not a geek, really, although most of the people I talk to think I am because I'm geekier than they are. But I'm really interested in ordinary people who are not particularly technical, who may not have an IQ of 130, because that's most of the people on the planet. And if we don't have most of the people on the planet pretty happy and comfortable and satisfied, we're on the road to chaos. And that's the other punchline for this talk, is that computer literacy, I'm going to give you the end first. I don't quite know why, but that's the way it's going to be. Computer literacy is more today social literacy, how to conduct ourselves and how to control the techniques. And technique is what we're really talking about. Technology means the study of technique. And it's not so much studying the technique, it's the technique itself. People have to know when to use it, when not to use it. And they have to know how to control it. And all of this conversation about the singularity and when are robots going to take care of the world, take over the world, and are human beings going to be obsolete? We'll get a little bit to that. I guess you can find out more about me by Googling me, and half of what you read is wrong, which is another piece of computer literacy well, we'll get to that. This was for your amusement while we tried to figure out how to do the rest of it. This is the report from a study that was done in 1974, either 74 or 76. And I'll go back to that in a minute. Let me go to here. The truth of the matter is I don't know what we need to know tomorrow. You're going to get my ideas. But you'll either like them or not. And I'll try and go through this relatively rapidly so that we have a chance to talk. This is a small enough audience so we don't have to be formal. And it's, for me, these are the beginnings of conversations, not the end of the conversation. So this will be on the internet. You can watch the video. Other people can watch the video. And what I'm interested in is promoting deep thought, resilience, looking at the future, and making it a better world for everybody. Computing is just a means to that end. Got to read my notes here for a minute, make sure I say what I want. There's going to be a lot of small print on these slides. The slides exist for me as backup for the talk. I don't expect you to read everything on the slide, and there is tiny print, which is the references to where I got the pictures or the slides. Don't stress about it, please. And as I said, nothing ever goes as I expect. Did anybody hear my talk yesterday? A couple, yeah, okay. So I will occasionally refer to some slides that I showed yesterday, but I won't go over it. That'll be available. You know, once you say something, it'll stick to you like glue, and you can never retract it. That's another thing about computer literacy. And we will have time at the end, I hope. This is also an invitation. I'm an educator, as I said, not a geek so much, and certainly not a computer hobbyist. And I started working on this book almost 20 years ago. And I'm doing these two talks to get going back on that book again. I'm probably never going to get it finished if nobody helps me. So if any of you would like to be a co-author, you're invited to get in touch with me, and let's see if we can get this going. My contemporaries are dying. Their stories are dying. Their children are throwing out all their old notes. And what's very important about capturing what was thought about by the old guard is that when we didn't have this kind of computing power, we knew it would happen. We believed it would happen. I mean, and certainly all the science fiction writers believed it would happen. So there was an awful lot of folks who were interested in the application of computers in education, and that's almost all of the early computer innovators, imagining how education would be changed. And it's coming true, which is really exciting, except that the anti-utopia is also coming true. Which is why I'm going to keep saying computer literacy is really social literacy. In case you didn't have a chance to read that study, the study results are that people in the 70s who knew about computing didn't believe it if it came on a computer printout. People who didn't know anything about computing were much more likely to believe what they read if a computer printed it out. Now today, you see it on a screen, but it's the same phenomenon. If you're not computer literate, if you don't know how the information got into the machine, you're much more vulnerable to believing what you see on that screen. And we have all this fake news issues. We have stuff repeated over and over again, and people often don't know what they can believe and what they can't believe. So just to illustrate that point, this one, it's pretty clear that this is a constructed image. Nobody, even a 4-year-old, is going to be fooled that that's a real picture. What about this one? Is this a real volcano? Is this a constructed picture? So for me, one of the things we need to know in the future is how to distinguish fact from fantasy. That's one of the reasons we teach programming, because once you've actually told the computer what to do, and you know you can make it lie, that's like getting a vaccination against fake news. You need to know who's responsible for the input. You need to know about the logic for how to get a computer to do something. And you need to know how to evaluate what you see. So we taught computer play shop. This was my contribution to computer literacy in the early 70s, well, mid-70s. And there was a big controversy, for those of you who were here yesterday. For those of you who weren't here yesterday, there was a big controversy as to whether you could be a computer literate if you didn't know how to program. So was computer literacy actually computer programming and IT training, or was it something else? And my answer was it was both. In the other show, the other presentation, I showed the pre-test and the post-test that we gave. And one of the things in the pre and post-test, this was a course that 40-hour course that we gave to 4th, 5th, and 6th graders. So 10 through 12-year-olds, 13-year-olds. One of the questions that we asked in the pre-test was, is it easier to program a computer to guide a rocket to the moon, or to program for the computer to program it so it can guide a car from my school to my home? And we said in 1975 that it was easier to get a computer to guide a rocket to the moon. And I was talking to a friend of mine who's a programmer, and he said, oh, no, that's wrong. So that question is up for grabs. But it was that kind of awareness of what the machine could do and couldn't do that was, for us, the most important part of computer literacy, or one of the most important parts. So we taught programming. Another issue, and it's a big issue today, is whether learning to be a programmer or a systems administrator or a data scientist is an important career and career opportunity. I'm working with folks in refugee camps in Africa at the moment, and there's a big push to teach them computer programming. And it just makes me cringe, because these are folks who don't have enough food, who don't have clean water, for whom there are no jobs, and who don't have a stable electricity, and for whom connectivity costs as much as their food. And why it's important to teach them computer programming today? I can't answer that, but it's sexy, it's hot. Coding is the big thing. So I think there are other things we need to learn aside from IT. That's not to say that nobody needs to learn how to do it, but it means we really need to look at the social and socioeconomic status and future of the people we're talking about and talking to. Applications. We just had our lesson in applications. In this case, it was the screen program for how to get Zoom to, actually it was Google Slides, to display the way we wanted to. The first level, I already said, the first level is knowing what you want to do. Second level is finding an application that is supposed to do it. Third level is learning to use that application the way it's supposed to work. But the most important part is, what do you do when it doesn't do what you want? And I don't have an answer for that. I don't know how to teach that. But I think that's what we're talking about when we're talking, partly when we're talking about computational thinking. And I think that's a really important aspect. I've asked a number of young people, what do they do when the app doesn't work? And their first answer is, oh, well, I ask my friends. It's like, okay, sure, you ask your friends. And what happens if your friends can't fix it? Well, we poke around. Okay, so you've poked around for an hour, and then what happens? Well, if we can't figure out how to do it, it's a bad app, and we'll go look for another app. There's a tremendous dependency going on, and we are promoting that dependency on the machines. And I think that's going to turn around and bite us in the butt. So there's a whole issue about applications and how to use applications, whether we will continue to support companies that build applications that do not work reliably, and how dependent we become on those applications, since most of us in the developed world have a small computer in our pocket. And then how to be resilient when it doesn't work. Another huge area, that's why I have these in bold print here, is policy and governance. In our computer literacy course, We not only taught programming and let the kids play games, we also had them look at how the computer is used in regulation, how the government works. And I think because we wanted people to be knowledgeable voters. So we felt like we were starting the kids off to be on the road to becoming knowledgeable voters. And we certainly see that today in, well, do we have voting machines or not? Do we track people in with COVID testing, with big data? There's hundreds of different issues that come around how we govern and what kinds of policies we put together, and especially around privacy and security. How many people actually read the terms and conditions when they sign up for something online? I recently tried to sign up to participate in a community discussion group, and I went and read the terms and conditions, which they said using this means you've agreed to the terms and conditions, and you had to click that yes, you'd read them and you agreed with them. And they happened to contain a full models release agreement for pictures. And it said, you're giving us permission to take your picture anytime. We own the picture, and we can use it or sell it. Well, that's not why I wanted to sign up for this thing. I wanted to participate in a conversation. I didn't want them to give them permission to, anytime I didn't have my camera covered, to take a picture of me and use it. It was then their picture. But that's part of the whole policy awareness issue. And then, of course, everybody wants to play some kind of game sometime. And what we did in our computer literacy course was not let people play on games on the computer until they'd played them on paper and pencil first, so that they realized that they didn't have to be dependent on the machine in order to play the game. Then we had them play on a plastic game board or some sort of pre-made game board, like a Monopoly game board. And then we let them start trying to program the computer, which gave them a whole different approach. So the context has changed, of course. You're all well aware of this. What do I want to say about this? I don't really want to say much about this, except that we need to make sure that from 25 onward, we create changes that we want to see happen in the world, and they will affect not just a few of us, but the whole world. Of course, the social context is that computers are ubiquitous, and we are constantly being encouraged to use them in all kinds of business and commerce, as well as all kinds of home applications. So we have the Internet of Things, and now put a computer in your doorbell. What we're doing is we're creating huge opportunities for cybercrime, and we're just beginning to deal with that. So to be computer literate in the future, you're going to have to know how to deal with that. You're going to have to be able to protect yourself. And I think most people have no idea how to do that. The anxiety level is rising, but how to do that is a real mystery for most people. Access to information, try and get your bank balance these days, especially when we're having more and more electrical brownouts and your modem won't work. That's going to be part of computer literacy ongoing. We have ChatGPT and lots of the furor about that. So what do we need to know about natural language processing? I could give a whole talk on response to, as probably all of you could, on response to natural language processing and large language models. But I think that the most important message in that for future literacy is to understand the difference between a language model and the computing and the logic that's behind it. A language model is only a tiny part of what AI can do. It's popular to talk about it because it's familiar and doesn't take as much background. But that's another aspect of future computer literacy. We need to be aware of the changes in cost of producing different things. And that's not only the changes in cost of producing computers. That's the changing in the cost profile model of producing anything. So whether it's supply chain shortages that change, depending on whether you're building electronic stuff or whether you're building mechanical stuff. This is something that, while it's not understanding about computing per se, it's understanding our society, it's understanding how the economics that affect us everyday work. I think that's going to be very important, including how labor demands change. And again, we could talk about that for many hours, but this is crystal ball gazing. I'm not trying to predict the future. I'm trying to get us to look at the parameters that need to be taken into account as we look towards the future. And I expect none of this is going to be news to any of the people here, but maybe it will. One of the other issues that I think is very important for us to look at is that all of us were brought up with classical economic theory. We were brought up, I expect in this room everybody was brought up with a capitalist market economy model. When you make radical changes through automation and AI to economic practice, you also have to look at the economic models that were developed under conditions of scarcity, under conditions where we had mechanical labor, but we still needed the mental labor, and there was still a huge labor market for that. Now we're beginning to change the nature of the demand for mental labor as well. And so to survive and thrive in today's social context, people are going to have to look at the changes, those changes that happen too. It's very popular today to have a concern for equity and sustainability. I like to sort of, when I talk to people who are saying, oh, there's no problem with jobs because we have hundreds and hundreds of jobs we can't fill, it's really important. And I'm talking to tech companies, and they're saying, well, oh no, we really need a lot of people. And I say, okay, the IQ test is a norm reference test. 50% of the population is below 100 IQ. Now, how many of you have jobs and are going to have more future jobs? For people with a tested IQ, and you may not like IQ tests, and I recognize there are lots and lots of different kinds of intelligence, and I value them all. But there's a pretty good correlation between people's scores on IQ tests, the old-fashioned IQ tests, and their success in a high-tech workplace. So how many of these new jobs are going to be available, new jobs, high-paying jobs, available to people with an IQ of under 120, tested IQ? So IQ is kind of an equity issue. We are not all equal in IQ. We may be equal in our deservingness. We may be equal in our citizenship entitlements. But we're actually not all equal in a lot of other parameters. And we need to look at that and be concerned with it. Of course, sustainability is also a huge issue. And then another issue that we need to deal with is our fear of AI and the singularity, and are the robots going to take over? And I think that is, I'm going to say more about that in a minute, but I think that the short answer to that is that's a projection. Humans are really mean to each other, and we're projecting that an artificial intelligence or a silicon-based life or consciousness would be just as mean as we are.
Aren't we the ones teaching
Aren't we the ones teaching them? Well, that's part of what we have to learn. That's part of our social consciousness. And the new computer literacy is that we have to take responsibility for what we create. So my answer is yes, we are the ones teaching them. The fear is that just like in human societies, somebody will take control and become mean. We're afraid that we are going to create entities that can do the same thing. Maybe they can, but whether they will or not is a big question. So that's another issue in the future computer literacy. Before we go too far down that path, we're talking about people who do have access. I think we need to make sure that we understand that the context hasn't changed for everybody. 4 billion people can't afford devices that they could connect to each other with, and they can't afford the connectivity. So these are people in areas of poverty. And another way to look at that access issue is that 50% of the land mass in the country of Canada doesn't have connectivity. Now, maybe Elon Musk will fix that, but right at the moment, that's a big deal. And what we know is even if Starlink does cover the Earth, it's not going to be free. So let's look a little bit at this picture. This actually came from a video called "The Real Reason Elon Musk is Developing His Own ChatGPT." And the picture isn't particularly part of the thesis of that video, but there are a bunch of messages in this image. The human is not paying attention to the robot. The human's off doing something else. Maybe he's playing a computer game. The image implies that the person is literate. They live in a house with electricity. The house needs to be kept clean. It probably has heat. He's in a t-shirt. He's not freezing. It's okay for him to sit around while the robot works. The robot is in a human form. We've anthropomorphized the robot. You know, some of us have iRobots. They don't look anything like. They do the job that this combination of machinery is doing, but they don't look anything like a human being. So we keep, as we are thinking about the use of automation, the use of AI, we keep anthropomorphizing it. We keep saying there's a human aspect of it. And we don't need to simulate human beings when we build automated tools. And that's also part of, I think, the new computer literacy. If we didn't do that, I think we'd have less concern about whether the computers are going to take over the world or not. In sort of, there's two areas of computer literacy that I think we need to look at. And by the way, in the previous talk, I talked about what we mean by literacy, so I just want to take a little sidetrack and say literacy originally meant familiarity with letters. And then we expanded it to being reading and writing, which is what letters are for. And then we expanded it to being, well, you're well-read and you're well-educated. That's a literate person, because that's where information came from in 1700s, 1800s, and 1900s. But then we expanded it again and said, well, the Polynesian, we expanded the idea of what reading is. Reading became interpretation. So the Polynesian sailor who can read the waves and find the islands even when he's out of sight of land, because he can read the waves and interpret the birds. So that's also literacy these days. So in the education field, we're using that very broad definition of literacy, not just can interpret letters and words. We used to think that we had to teach programming. Now we call it computational thinking. And certainly computational thinking and problem solving and problem analysis, I think everybody needs that. But you don't need it just to operate a computer. You need it for everything. So I think that's part of the social literacy. We do need to have a little bit of coding in the sense that we need to be able to set the parameters on the apps, set our preferences, make our selections on Netflix. There's all kind of make our doorbell work the way we want it to. My most important issue in this last week was that I was trying to navigate it because I drive in California most of the time. So I get off the plane and go to get my rental car. And the first glitch was that Thrifty would not rent me a car because I had a debit card and not a credit card. So I had to walk down the street and Budget would rent me a car. But I didn't get the map app, so the map screen didn't work on the car. They didn't give me a paper map, and so I needed to use the map on my phone, since it's an iPhone and it would do CarPlay. I could connect it to the screen in the car so that I could actually follow the map while I was driving. Otherwise, you have to pull over and look at tiny screen on your phone. But the first problem was that it wasn't always right. It didn't send me down the right road. And then a few days later, after I struggled through that one, the synchronization between the car screen and the phone screen, I mean, the map's coming from the phone, and the synchronization failed. And then the low tire light went on. And the car is beeping at me, the low tire light is on, the maps don't synchronize. And again, this is application literacy. I was not literate enough to handle this situation. I didn't end up on the roadside in tears, but pretty close. I did almost get creamed by not following it said turn left, and I didn't realize in New Jersey that meant turn right. So that was pretty scary. So there's some aspects of coding and application fluency. I failed. I can't wait to get back to California where I know how to drive and I'm not dependent on this stuff. Another aspect is that in computer literacy and the use of computers in education, in the old days, we used games as motivation. I think, given the changing economic conditions, that we are going to actually use games as recreation. I happen to think that we are at an inflection point where the scarcity model could go away if we would let it. And we need to learn to amuse ourselves. We've been investing for 500 years at least in creating labor-saving devices. You know, let's create more leisure. Oh, we need that. Yeah, well, what do we need the leisure for? We live in a society where if you spend all your time in leisure pursuits, you're considered lazy. What happens if the machines actually do all the work and the humans don't have to? So for me, the new literacy includes being able to pursue leisure, have recreation, and it's being respectable. One of those kinds of non-economic pursuits that we need to engage in is what we call creativity and artistic expression. So understanding how to use the computer as an additional paintbrush, as an additional tool for artistic expression, for celebration, for music, for communicating with each other. I think that's equally important as a literacy that we need to develop. Now, of course, there's a big controversy about, oh, well, are the AIs really creative? You know, can they write original music? And I'm just working on an essay on that one. I think they are not creative in the way that humans are creative. Yes, they can create things, they can produce things that are different from what any human has produced so far, but they are so derivative of what humans produce that they're very different from the kind of creativity that I think is part of the new literacy and part of what we need to develop. So down here it says, what are we going to do with our labor-saving devices? And again, even in the United Nations Sustainable Development SDG goals, when you look at SDG 4, which is the education component, it says educate for employment. If the employment structure, if the economic structure of our society changes as a result of what we're doing, we need a different kind of literacy. We need to educate for different pursuits for humans. So I'm not the only one that thinks this. This is an excerpt from a publication called Work/Technology 2050, Scenarios and Actions by the Millennium Project. It was a three-year study conducted in 2017, sort of between 2017 and 2020. I didn't work on this one. I worked on a later one that was a COVID-19 one, and that was sort of one of the bucket list things on my life goals was to work with one of these big futurist organizations. So I was really delighted to be involved in that. And I would love to be able to do a Millennium study. They have a whole process for doing these studies that are usually a 3-year study on the future of education. And of course, there would be a huge amount of computing discussed. I mean, there's a lot of computing involved in actually the process of doing these studies. But that's the next thing on my list of things that I'd like to do. So this is the positive. They do 3 scenarios. They do a worst case scenario of what do you think is the worst thing? If everything goes wrong, what's going to happen in the topic that they're looking at? What do you think is sort of the middle of the road, the most likely thing? And what do you think is the most positive thing? And they're not trying to predict and say this is going to happen. They are an advisory consultant body to say, for organizations like the Red Cross, to say you need to have contingency plans in case one of these scenarios or something like this scenario happens. So their positive scenario is human labor and knowledge to machine labor and knowledge, freedom from the necessity to have a job and earn a living, to achieve self-respect. So this self-esteem, perception that you're okay if you don't work, that it's all right to be what used to be a starving artist. You don't have to be a starving artist anymore. You can be an artist and skip the starving. That doesn't mean the end of capitalism. It doesn't mean the end of competition. It means a choice between whether you want to compete in the economic realm or whether you want to use your life to pursue something different. Just for completeness, in the slide deck I added the longer quote from that report. I just go back to this picture because the question is, do we have the courage to let ourselves create abundance with and overcome that primary economic assumption, the assumption of all classical economics? There's 2 assumptions. One is that an economic entity is scarce. There's not enough of it. And the other is that people act as rational consumers. Well, we know people aren't rational, and there's now behavioral economics where people are beginning to study what real humans do as compared with the economic ideal of classical economics. But we also have to look at, how do we redistribute the wealth that this new technologies can produce. If we can't overcome that hurdle, we won't let it happen. We will program competitiveness into the computer. We will maintain the existing scarcity hypothesis, and we'll suffer from it, I think. So, particular bold words for updated computer literacy. Cost parameters, labor demands, that's going to change. Are we going to maintain the taboo against sitting back and enjoying ourselves? Can you make, I mean, what is it, Christo, who made these huge art installations that went on for miles and left them up for a year or two and then just took them down, they disappeared. Is it okay to just have celebrations, to go out and dance and sing? And not be productive in the way that we have had to be productive in the past in order to survive and thrive. The big issue is if we go from humans being the source of our productivity that lets us live happy, comfortable lives, to machines and AIs doing that, how do we distribute that wealth? We do not have a mechanism for that right now. Right now it's the market. But if you're not working, how do you get the means of obtaining those things? We have to rethink who owns the robots and who owns the income and the benefit of owning those robots. Maybe ownership itself has to be rethought. Again, I'm saying these things in support of my idea that we are transforming from computer literacy being learning about computers and how to operate them to its being social literacy for how do we operate our society, because it is changing. So I've actually already talked about the things that are on this slide. Games as recreation and all different kinds of recreation. It means recreation. Making something again. So whether it's permanent, that we build something that lasts over time, or whether it's an instantaneous happening, we have to look at how we value those things. And just as an aside that just occurred to me, it's not in my notes, is think about how we look at the homeless, quote, the homeless. Humans have been nomads throughout most of their existence. It's only in relatively recent history that humans have settled down and lived in, 10,000 years is pretty recent, but lived permanently. But we live in a society where someone who is a nomad and lives in an RV, travels around and parks wherever they can find a place to park, we look down on those people. We say, oh, those people are second-class citizens. We have to find them a home. And they've got to not pursue that lifestyle. But is there any reason we have to take that attitude? I've actually lived in a VW bus. I can tell you it's fun. Of course, we are going to need professionals who can repair the machines, who can build the algorithms that the machines can't do. I don't think we'll ever get to the point where they can do everything. They may be able to repair themselves mostly, but just like when my map program malfunctioned, what happens when the computer that you thought was going to repair itself doesn't work the way it was expected to work? So there's another slide here, which is I have no notes on, which is key questions. Okay, so can we allow computers to overcome scarcity and usher in an age of abundance? How do we recover when the app doesn't work as expected? And of course, the one with the picture of the cows around the tornado is garbage in, garbage out. We have to learn to interpret what's what's real, what's imaginary on the screens that are ubiquitous. And what I've been saying since 1975 is that the truly computer literate person is the person who knows when to turn the computer off. So those are my prepared remarks, and we have 8 minutes and 23 seconds for questions, and that's how to reach me. Anybody, comments, questions, disagreements, arguments? Do we have a microphone?
Probably not, but that's okay. The subject is very broad.
Is it working, the microphone? Okay.
Technical difficulty.
Yeah, the app doesn't work as planned.
Exactly. So the discussion and all the things you brought up was way too broad for me to comment on everything that goes
Good.
through my head, because I think it's a fascinating subject and necessary. So most of us have our own little world, you know? So what you're talking about is worldwide. Mm-hmm. But we all don't live in that every one of those situations, but we have our own situation. So as I see the Vintage Computer Federation, and we've been talking about the last 3 days about how to keep it alive and how it relates to education, I look at it from my own perspective, and that is, I'm a businessman who has a hard time hiring people who can think and get through these problematic issues like you were experiencing in the car. I try to employ youngsters and get them through this problem because I'm in the fireplace business. I repair fireplaces and stoves, so they have to be troubleshooters. Mm-hmm. So I came to that because I'm a kind of a mid-geek nerd and athlete all at the same time, right? So I hung out with everybody in school, but I really appreciated that the the people who could figure stuff out would have a really good way in life. And the ones who just wanted to play sports, if something went wrong, if they broke their leg, that's the end of that. So I kind of gravitated towards the problem solver. So my question is in this education format are the problem solvers still coming out of the youth? There was a gentleman who said he got into this trade because his father gave him a Commodore 64, and I thought that was fantastic, right? That's seeding somebody, but the kid also had to have an interest. So what I'm seeing in our own communities, and we live in a regular community just like here. We don't live in Asia or Africa, so they have completely different problems. Mm-hmm. But in my case, we're not seeing these youth get technical enough, as I see it. They love playing the games. Computing now is gaming, which has a value, I'm sure, but they're not problem solving, and they don't even know how to read a manual and connect the dots to fix a product. They have the intelligence to do so.
But not the motivation.
They haven't been taught the motivation, and they haven't been taught that that's how you can progress in life, is it if you can create a scenario where you can either work for yourself or be in a trade where you can be useful, right? So they're very give-up type of personalities. That's what we're seeing. They give up very easily.
We got it.
So can the educational system teach these kids to not give up?
Not without the rest of the world backing them up. Go ahead. Go ahead.
Hello, can you hear me? Oh.
Yeah.
I want to make a comment, also sort of as an addition / response to your comment as well. I've been thinking about this topic a lot, and just as a background, I'm millennial, in the middle of the generation, born '88. I look at like the older generation. Like, it seems like there was a window of like people who were born in a certain window, let's say between like mid 70s to like mid 90s, where they were exposed to a world of computing that was open, and there was a lot of encouragement to tinker around. People who grew up on the Commodore 64, the Ataris, even going into the world of DOS PCs, it seems like they have that mentality of like figuring things out, right? Now this is a bit of a generalization, because within that generation, it's people who got into computers, right? The rest of the generation, you can think of it as, they use computers, But then you have before them were people that sort of grew up before computers became a thing, right? Mm-hmm. So a lot of them treated as, and again, this might be a generalization, but as like a black box that you just use it and, does something. And then the Gen Z, right? That's 96 to like 2013. They grew up on smartphones. Again, a black box where you just use it and it just does what you need it to do, right? And in response to you, I think it's industry that really sort of fomented that mentality of like, don't think about it, right? Don't try to figure it out. It just does what it's supposed to do, right? So if you have a generation that's growing up on smartphones, what can you do with a smartphone? Like, you can't peer into the hood and change it or do anything, right? So how can you expect that generation that grew up on smartphones to want?
You could probably create an app to diagnose your car, right?
Yep.
So you could probably learn to create an app.
That would.
You're a smart kid to diagnose your car if it was an open enough system.
Yeah.
Yes, but take into account, and I want to acknowledge your frustration, and it's a real important problem that kids seem to be today quite passive, not terribly curious in a lot of ways, and becoming more and more dependent. That's why I'm emphasizing my own frustration with the map app. It's like, I asked the person that I was staying with, how do I get here from there? And they said, well, don't you have an app? It's like, yeah, but I like to hear it from a person because I know that this app is flawed. But a lot of people are just saying, oh, that's okay, I'll just use the app, and if I can't use the app, I won't go. I think that's terribly dangerous. I haven't got a solution for it. My biggest solution is to get rid of schools. But not that we shouldn't have educational institutions, but that the way that schools have been constituted in the past will not serve us in the future. That's another talk. Yeah, we're the last talk, so we can talk as long as we want, I believe, until they throw us out. And I just wanted to acknowledge that anybody that doesn't want to stay, anybody that wants to stay, please feel free to stay. I'll stay and talk all night. Anybody that wants to go, thank you very much for coming. And I really appreciate, you've been a good audience.